Going to work for most Air Force personnel is a pleasant experience. We're proud of our bases with their well-maintained facilities and grounds. Our civil engineer duty locations are modern and furnished with the newest equipment of any branch of service. This type of work environment is indicative of a highly trained, professional military force.
This peaceful setting can change if your base comes under enemy or terrorist attack or experiences the wrath of a natural disaster such as earthquake or hurricane. These situations can cause widespread damage to the base infrastructure. What was once a well-maintained base may now be total shambles. The road to restoring your base may be long and seem unending.
Who responds to this emergency situation? Who evaluates the damage and starts the recovery process? The organization responsible for accomplishing these tasks is civil engineers. A small group of highly qualified civil engineers form the Damage Assessment and Response Team, or DART. They are among the first on scene. Without them, the ability to recover our base would be severely hampered. The purpose of this training program is to introduce DART operations. This program includes an introduction, team composition, assessment techniques, and damage report information. When you understand DART responsibilities in both base recovery after attack and major natural disaster response scenarios, you can reduce post-disaster confusion and get recovery efforts started faster.
One of the smartest things you can do to prepare for a disaster is to organize your response teams. These teams must be trained and equipped to perform specific recovery tasks. What is the recovery concept, and how do civil engineers interface into this effort? Each Air Force base must be organized to respond to disasters. Likewise, civil engineers must be organized for peacetime disaster response, wartime response, and base recovery. Base-level organizations responsible for disaster response and recovery can vary between bases. The differences usually aren't significant, often only in name. No matter how the base is organized, similar functions and tasks must be performed. These requirements permit some relatively universal observations about disasters and wartime response organization.
Peacetime emergencies dictate that the base-level disaster response structure be flexible. It must adapt to the situation. Minor incidents are handled by the day-to-day base emergency response forces such as the fire department, security police, and base medical services. Personnel are trained on response procedures to perform a variety of emergency tasks. They also participate in exercises to validate the effectiveness of their program. These peacetime organizations focus on saving lives and protecting property.
As the response requirements become more complex, the emergency response organization structure must expand. The Air Force uses a disaster response force to respond to major accidents, natural disasters, and other peacetime contingencies beyond the scope of the full-time emergency response agencies just discussed. The Disaster Response Force provides command and control for the incident and coordinates personnel and equipment necessary to handle the situation. The Disaster Control Group, Base Command Post, Unit Control Centers, and specialized teams make up the four elements of the Disaster Response Force.
In the most severe peacetime emergencies, a disaster control group can become so inundated with information they can lose focus on the big picture and be unable to control the entire effort.
In these difficult situations, a control structure similar to that used for base recovery after attack, or BRAT, can be more effective. The BRAT scenario applies to overseas high-threat locations, which are subject to a major attack. At these locations, you can expect extensive damage, intense levels of recovery activity, hazards such as unexploded ordnance, and chemical agents following an attack. We can anticipate airfield pavements and utility systems will be extensively damaged. This damage will hinder aircraft generation activities. In the first few hours after the attack, the overriding priority is to get the aircraft flying again.
Civil engineers have a critical role in almost all crisis responses. The two teams organized and trained to perform damage assessments are the Damage Assessment Team, or DAT, and the Damage Assessment and Response Team, or DART. DATs concentrate on launch and recovery surfaces such as runways, taxiways, and parking aprons. The DAT team surveys airfield surfaces and associated facilities which directly support aircraft operations. They classify, record, and mark unexploded ordnance locations and determine routes of travel for airfield repair teams. Additional information on DAT duties and responsibilities can be obtained by viewing the various rapid runway repair video productions contained in the Prime Beef Home Station Training Program.
Damage assessment and response teams, on the other hand, perform damage assessment on the remainder of the base. These multi-specialty teams survey damaged utilities and facilities, identify other hazards, and conduct emergency utility isolation. They also evaluate repair and demolition requirements, estimate manpower and equipment requirements, and coordinate on-scene recovery operations if directed by the Civil Engineer Damage Control Center. The task just described may seem like quite an undertaking for civil engineer personnel, but who's better suited to perform these tasks than the people who service and maintain these systems on a daily basis? Let's take a closer look at the DART composition.
The number of damage assessment and response teams that need to be established varies. This depends mainly on the size of the installation to be surveyed. A typical DART team would look like this chart. The facility maintenance element of the CE operations flight is a prime source for these team members. When the element is divided into zones, each zonal shop should provide the people to make up a DART. They would then assess damage in their particular zones. The day-to-day work, which zonal maintenance requires, gives team members added expertise when critical assessments must be made. Normally, 3 teams should be sufficient for the average size base. Note that the personnel skill mix purposely varies slightly from team to team. Don't hesitate to tailor the skill mix to your installation's facility or utility situation. For example, if your base has a large POL complex, you may want to consider substituting a liquid fuels maintenance person on one of your teams. If you have a civilian workforce available, field more teams. Additional teams can estimate damage more rapidly and reduce the area each team must survey.
Each DART is led by an officer who is responsible for communicating assessment information to the Damage Control Center. They must also decide whether to enter a known UXO area for survey purposes or alter the assessment route, and make decisions for isolating portions of damaged utility systems. Ideally, the DART officers should have educational disciplines that would match the type of damage to be assessed. Disciplines in the electrical, mechanical, or structural areas are recommended. Assigning qualified people to each team is a step in the right direction. Personnel not properly equipped cannot perform up to their full potential. Equipment requirements for the DARTs will depend on the team's damage assessment transportation capability. Dedicated DART vehicle support is mandatory. If vehicles are destroyed or the roads blocked, the assessment may have to be done on foot. The team's assessment time will be greatly lengthened.
The following equipment is recommended for DART support: chemical warfare ensemble, helmet, and body armor. Data recording and reporting equipment, base grid maps, utility drawings, damage assessment forms, and radios. Global positioning system. Binoculars and night vision devices. Utilities isolation tools and gear such as electrical hot sticks, fuse pullers, and valve keys. Other miscellaneous equipment such as flashlights, measuring tapes, NBC, UXO, and utility shutoff markers, and a first aid kit are also recommended. This section covered who should be on the DART and what equipment they will require. Now let's look at what kind of assessment techniques the teams should use.
Current base recovery after attack planning for DART operations is similar to that used for airfield pavement assessment. Two phases of activity are envisioned: initial reconnaissance and detailed damage assessment. During Phase 1 reconnaissance, an initial gross assessment of the base is made from base populace and DART inputs. These inputs identify damage to facilities and utilities and quickly locate potential unexploded ordnance areas. These preliminary survey results are used to obtain a general idea of overall base damage and to update the pre-planned DART damage assessment routes. In the detailed damage assessment, or Phase 2, the DARTs follow Damage Control Center directed travel routes to various critical facilities and utilities throughout the installation. The DARTs report the levels of damage along their predetermined routes and concentrate on priority facilities. Detailed damage assessment requires more accurate locations and descriptions of problems than the initial reconnaissance. The detailed reports form the basis for repair crew sizing, material and vehicle allocation, and to some degree, prioritization of efforts.
The facility priority list contained in the base civil engineer contingency response plan should be used as a guide for identifying critical facilities. This list will ensure that key facilities and systems on the installation are checked and any unreported damage found. If a high-threat location does not have a predetermined facility priority list, consider the following priority facilities as a starting point: command posts and command and control facilities directly related to combat flying squadrons, like the Squadron Operations Building, communications facilities, POL and munitions facilities, fire stations, medical facilities, and utility plants and distribution substations.
DART routes during damage assessment cannot be haphazard. They should be planned in advance with highest priority areas checked first. Although damage assessment routes are determined in advance, they can be altered to meet the contingency situation. Routes should be updated as initial damage reports are received. Routes with known damage should be assigned to the DART with that particular expertise. A route with known POL problems should be assigned to the team with a POL specialist. Match the specific skills on a particular DART with the damages expected along the route.
Now that the reconnaissance routes and prioritized facilities and utility systems have been identified, let's take an in-depth look at what happens during an enemy attack scenario and Phase 1 and 2 reconnaissance efforts. Throughout this scenario, we'll cover the DART responsibilities. Before an attack, the DARTs are sheltered in dispersed locations. DARTs maintain communication with a damage control center either by landline or radio. Only one team should be assigned to the shelter. This action provides a degree of redundancy if one or more shelters are hit.
During the attack, team members will remain in the shelter until the all-clear signal is received.
In the post-attack environment, the DARTs serve as the eyes and ears of the damage control center. Since the entire base recovery effort hinges on the efforts of the DARTs and the DCC, the interface between those two functions must be close. Initial reconnaissance quickly assesses the post-attack environment to identify major utility disruption and facility damage. Exact descriptions and measurements are not expected during Phase 1 reporting. The Damage Control Center will receive information from all over the base by people who are not trained or familiar with damage assessment techniques. DART team members will remain in the immediate vicinity of their shelter or pre-selected observation post. Their input will consist of visible damage. We can also expect many confusing UXO inputs. Most non-CE personnel do not have an in-depth unexploded ordnance reconnaissance background or experience. DART teams need to constantly look for UXOs. During the Phase 1 initial reconnaissance, the Damage Control Center will gather damage information and update maps and status boards. The DCC uses this information to update the predetermined damage assessment routes.
Once these steps are completed, the detailed damage assessment can begin. Depending on the amount of damage in a particular area and the availability of clear communications, The DART may have to go to the DCC for new damage assessment route information. If no known damage is reported, the DARTs can start their assessment right from the shelter. Phase 2 damage assessment will be dangerous and perhaps time-consuming. This will depend upon the extent of the damage and size of the installation. The team chiefs will brief their teams on any route changes and known hazards or problems. Then the teams will begin their assessment. As the DARTs travel their routes, they will report major problems and hazards such as UXO fields, utility breaks, and fires. Radio discipline is critical and must be maintained. Report only necessary information back to the DCC.
Injured personnel or casualties may be encountered during damage assessment. The buddy care and first aid learned during prime beef training now becomes important. To the extent practicable, DARTs should help the injured and perform rescue within the team's capability. Notify the DCC for additional assistance if required. While damage assessment is the DART's primary task, they cannot ignore giving aid to others. DART team chiefs decide the balance between life-saving actions, rescue, and damage assessment responsibilities.
DARTs assess each designated critical facility and utility along their predetermined route. Where damage is found, repair or demolition estimates are developed. Where damaged utilities are found, DART members may attempt to isolate the problem if they can do so safely. Where UXOs are found, standard explosive ordnance reconnaissance functions should be performed. Locate the munition, identify the type, report the findings to the DCC, and mark the area with ropes and appropriate signs. DART members never attempt to move a UXO, even if it interferes with utility isolation or facility damage assessment. An explosive ordnance disposal team must be called.
As each route is completed, DARTs return to the DCC. There they will hand in their hard copy assessment reports and await further taskings. The DCC takes all the inputs and compares them against available resources. This process bumps all the emergency work requirements up against the available people, equipment, and material required to do the repair. In many situations where insufficient resources exist, hard choices must be made. That's why it's important to prioritize requirements.
If follow-on attacks are imminent, team members should return to their original shelter. DART vehicles must be resupplied with any equipment or materials that may have been expended during earlier assessment runs. The assessment techniques covered what DARTs look at and how they accomplish assessment in a contingency environment. If the DART reports are thorough, the base civil engineer will be able to activate the recovery force more effectively. The sights and sounds of your base being destroyed will make a lasting impression. Separating these vivid impressions to relay critical data to the Damage Control Center will be the key to your team's effectiveness. Damage reporting requires much more than just calling in the visual damage inflicted. DARTs must determine whether the facility or utility can be repaired.
Team members must be aware of the following factors in developing damage repair estimates. Repair times are critical. The quickest, least work, least material intensive repair should be identified. Accuracy is important. DARTs are purposely configured with experienced personnel of varied expertise. Familiarity with available equipment and materials is necessary. Repair estimates must be made considering the resources that are readily available. Knowledge of civil engineer career field capabilities is required. Repair estimates must include work crew size and skills required.
Where repair is not feasible and demolition action is called for, demolition estimates are required. Safety is paramount. Demolition actions are designated to alleviate serious safety hazards. Final cleanup can wait. If explosive demolition activities are required, DART members must indicate any special needs and personnel expertise in this type of demolition estimate. These activities are not typical for most engineers.
As previously mentioned, the DART's damage assessment reports are relayed to the Damage Control Center. The DCC passes much of the information on to the Survival Recovery Center. The Survival Recovery Center, or command post, analyzes the damage assessment and repair information for reports to higher headquarters. Many reports are required, but three of the most important ones are the OPREP 3, Tempest Rapid, and SITREP.
Operation Event, or Incident Report Number 3, is submitted to the U.S. Air Force Operations Center in the Pentagon. And OPREP 3 reports any event or incident that may be of interest to the Chief of Staff, Air Force.
The Tempest Rapid Report provides information on the use of Air Force resources in natural disaster relief operations. This peacetime report is submitted to the Air Force National Security Emergency Preparedness Office.
Once the initial emergency report is submitted, a follow-on status is normally provided in the Commander's Situation Report. The SITREP reports are unit-generated and usually address major engineer problems or shortfalls. Reports are sent to Major Command and the Parent Joint Command. Damage assessment forms the foundation for prompt and effective base recovery actions. Civil engineers play a major role in the assessment after natural disasters and attack.
The purpose of this training program was to introduce civil engineers to damage assessment and response team operations.
Air Force Damage Assessment and Response concept outlined the responsibilities of both the DAT and DART for comparison purposes.
DART team composition included the team size and career field specialties. Equipment required to perform the assessment evaluations was identified, and the leadership role for the officer in charge was highlighted.
Assessment techniques outlined specific responsibilities for both the base recovery after attack and the major natural disaster response scenarios. Priority facilities and utility systems were identified, as well as Phase 1, initial reconnaissance, and Phase 2, detailed reconnaissance requirements were explained. From the information gathered, damage assessment reports were developed and included damage quantification, repair estimates, and demolition actions. You can't find more qualified and experienced personnel than the men and women who maintain these facilities and utility systems on a daily basis. In time of emergency, there's only one organization to call.
Civil engineers, may I help you?